a deep sense of calling is really important. And that especially applies to New York City. But I would just say, like, in general, anybody trying to be obedient to the will of God in their lives needs to love where they live and have a deep calling, a sense of conviction that they're living in the right place, not just out of convenience or not even just to be close to family. Those are important things, but genuinely because they believe they're supposed to be where they are.
This is the Faithfully Podcast.
Welcome to the Faithfully Podcast. I'm joined today by Guy Wasko, who has spent years faithfully investing in the spiritual lives of people in New York City. As the Executive Director of FOR.NYC, Guy is deeply committed to seeing the church united and activated for the good of New York City. Guy, I am really grateful to have you here with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. What an honor.
So, Guy, for those who may not know you yet, can you share a little bit about your story and how you got started in ministry?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's really fascinating to consider everybody's journey. And like when we meet people, what we're seeing isn't the whole picture, right? So just being aware of the weight and beauty and joy of everybody's story, regardless of who they are and how they look on the outside. So for me, what you don't know is that I come from a broken family. My parents divorced when I was 3.5, Christian family, but still that separation and brokenness is a part of the very early beginning for me. And I know you're not asking me to go all the way through like a historical narrative here.
We want to hear everything, guys.
Every detail. Yeah. And when I was 5, but because I was raised in a Christian family, but had this sense of brokenness, I was an incredibly rebellious kid. And ultimately, my mom made an appointment for me to meet with the pastor of our church where we were attending at the time. And in that meeting, I gave my life to Jesus, and I was 9. And then at 12, I was called to ministry. And so for the rest of my young adult, adolescent, college years, I knew I was preparing for a life of vocational ministry. And that looked like Bible college and seminary and grad school, and then youth ministry for a long time, and then ultimately moved to the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 2009 to plant the church.
Wow, a call to ministry at 12 years old. Yes. That's pretty rare.
It is rare.
I interview a lot of ministry leaders, and I would say that is an early call.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, sure. It's one of those things where, like, it feels kind of cliche, Alicia, but we don't get to choose these things. I'm in a pew with my entire family on a Thursday night at Skycrest Baptist Church in Clearwater, Florida. And as a Baptist church, we have an annual revival. It's on the calendar. We know when the Holy Spirit's going to show up, right? So that's what we're doing. We're running the Baptist play with revivals. And I'm a little tongue-in-cheek here, but it was a beautiful experience, and I think it's a valuable experience to contend for the presence of God. So it's a Thursday night. This guest preacher is in town doing his thing. And of course, out of all the books of the Bible, what is he preaching out of? The book of Jonah. So the very first night, I hear as clearly as you and I are talking right now, the Lord say, I want you to give your life to full-time vocational ministry. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm going to be a cop. I'm going to be a firefighter. I'm 12. I'm going to be a professional baseball player. But the Lord was like, no, I want you to be in ministry. So I was like, cool. Well, let's talk tomorrow. So because it's a revival service, it's like a camp meeting every night for Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Alicia, this is happening every evening. And every time I say the same thing to the Lord, I'm just like, nah, I'm good. Wow. So finally, on the last service, Sunday night, I make a deal with the Lord. And I was like, listen, if you peep up and if you speak up again, then I'm in. I'll do it. And sure enough, that's what happened. I'm sitting in the pew. I'm on the end, and I feel like the Lord is just speaking to me, like directly to my heart in a way that I can hear, and I know that it's his voice. And I was like, okay. So without telling my mom and dad, without telling anybody else, I pop up during the altar call, walk down front, tell Bob Adams, the pastor of our church, I'm Guy, I'm with this family. He's like, I know who you are. He's like, I think God's calling me to ministry. He turns me around in front of the entire church and says, this is Guy, his family's sitting there. He's just given his life to full-time vocational ministry.
Wow.
That's how it happened.
That's incredible. Okay. So age 12, called a ministry in Florida. How did you find yourself in New York City?
So, I mean, I think the way that a lot of people do, you try to say, God, this is my life. My life isn't actually yours. I want to be obedient to you. And so you end up making the next decision that's in front of you. And that leads you to the next thing. And it introduces you to a whole new world, a whole new network, new people and relationships. And one of the things that's interesting is in college, in undergrad, in Georgia, I had the chance to do 4 years at this beautiful small Bible college called Toccoa Falls. And in 1997, I met an Australian who had just moved to New York named John Tyson. And John met his wife, Christy, and they took off and started their lives. I met my wife, Rebecca, and we kind of launched off in our lives. But years later, God would bring us back together, John Tyson and myself, in ministry in a couple of different expressions across the country. And then ultimately led to the invitation to move to New York City, first in 2006. And the timing wasn't quite right for my family and I, but then eventually in 2009 to plant with Trinity Grace, what was Trinity Grace at the time? Again, our parish was in the East Village. So from Florida, a couple of different places in between, and then ultimately the Lower East Side because of relationship. And isn't that how God works? It's through relationship.
That's right. Wow. So, okay, you planted on the Lower East Side in 2009. Was there a defining moment for you when New York City became not just this place where you were planting, but where you were really called to serve?
Yeah, I think everybody who's visited New York or lives in the country or anywhere else and they want to go visit, be a tourist. So that happened for me a couple of times. One time in particular, I was here leading a short-term missions trip as a youth pastor. And I remember being in a part of the city in Lower Manhattan thinking, this entire place is fascinating to me. I love the energy and the culture and the diversity and the pace, all these things that are true of New York. And I thought, I couldn't live in this neighborhood, but I think I could live in New York. And that was in 2004. So then fast forward all these years, we're having these conversations with John and the team at Trinity Grace about New York City and these different opportunities. And it was a neat idea. And again, we said no. Like I said, in 2006, we said no. So it wasn't quite there in our bones yet, in our heart. But in 2009, when we were visiting the city with the Trinity Grace team and John and Christy, we walked through the East Village for the very first time. I'd heard about the neighborhood. I saw Rent on Broadway. There's familiarity. But until you see a place and you're breathing its air, you're walking its streets, you don't really know it quite yet. And I remember that very first time, John and Christy brought my wife and I, Rebecca, through Tompkins Square Park. And John asked us if we were if God was calling us to care for the spiritual climate of that neighborhood. And I remember just being welled up with emotion and a deep sense of conviction that was already my burden, that was something I was going to put on. I put this shirt on. This is part of who I am, but also part of who God's calling us to be. Yeah. So I would say February of 2009 was the moment when we felt burdened for the spiritual climate and responsibility of the East Village.
Wow. And so it's almost 20 years later.
Yeah,
and
that's wild.
By the way, as you're sharing your story, I can't help but feel like I've been living a parallel life next to you. I came to the city in 2004.
Yeah.
And lots of things have happened to me in the last 20 plus years here in New York City. It's not been a straight line. Lots of bumps in the road.
Yes.
Right. New York City has a way of doing that to you.
That's right.
When you look back at all this time that you've been serving here in New York, what has shaped you? What seasons, what challenges?
Yeah, I mean, which one hasn't, right? I mean, I think when you first move here if you're not from New York City and you move here or to any place, you're trying to figure out what the narrative of the city is. And the bigger the city or the more impressive the location, the more there's probably opportunity for change and for there to be a sense of dissonance. And so I think one of the things that helped us tremendously was moving to New York with a deep sense of I'm moving here as a missionary, not like somebody who's got it figured out. And so those early days, you're trying to figure out how to dress and why do people walk this way and how many rolls of toilet paper can you buy at a time because you live in a 630 square foot apartment with 5 other humans. There's all those sort of dynamics, but the there were so many beautiful stories where God provided for us out of nowhere. And we really didn't, even finding our first apartment, Alicia, we hadn't even moved here yet. And we needed $9,000 to be able to put first, last, and a security deposit down. And I flew here with a plane voucher and an invitation from a friend to sleep on a couch. That's all we had. So I could get here and get back. That's it. My wife was like, why are you going to New York right now? We don't have any money. I was like, we need a place to live. So while I was on that trip, through 3 separate people, God gave us the money to be able to get our first apartment. And there's been multiple moments like that over the last almost 17 years we've lived here, where God has just met the need in incredible ways. But there's also another moment where it's not just like, there's highs and lows, of course. And I wish we had the time to talk about all of them for both of us. But one of the lows was, I remember a really dark moment. The church was established. We were running. Everything was going kind of fine or whatever. But I remember just feeling really heavy and stuck. And I was like, oh my gosh. I called a friend and I was describing to him what was going on in my heart and my soul and my brain, like what I was thinking. And I was like, am I depressed? And it was like the first realization that I had, like as a pastor, as a human, where I was like, as I reflect on myself, I actually think I might be stuck. I need help. Mm-hmm. So I reached out to some help. And one of the exercises that ultimately I was led to is I sat down with my journal and I took account. I wrote down every name of every person that had intersected our lives from 2009 to that point that was no longer in our lives anymore, had moved on, had either left the plant or left the city. And I wrote down over 32 names in that short period of time that we were like integrated, doing life with, planting. And yet these people had come into our lives for a season and then left. Mm-hmm. So one of the low moments for me was just sitting with the grief of the transient nature of this city, which rewires your brain and how you relate to people, how you build, what you're asking of people, what investment strategies look like, both from human resource and financial, all of it. It affects everything. So I think that's a really unique dynamic of New York City, is how do we build something for the long haul, but also realize that people that you build with aren't going to go with you long term. And even the people that are in your life right now today, the chances are the revolving door is going to happen again. And you might be the only one left, or one of the few people left.
Yeah, that really resonates with me as a 20-plus year New Yorker. Yeah. I think the way you articulated it is perfect. The transient nature, the grief, and coming to terms with that. And I think that's why I think more than anywhere else, folks who are called here to serve in New York City, they have to really be called here because you face a lot of really unique challenges.
Yes.
I also want to go back to that great story you shared about not having any money, but needing to find a place to live. I mean, the hand of God was on you and on that moment, because I can tell you when I came to New York City, I had a job in hand at Goldman Sachs.
Yep.
And in order to rent my first apartment, I still needed my mother to co-sign my lease.
That's right.
That is how difficult it is to start a life in New York City.
You still need help. Yeah.
You need help. And Lord was with you when he started you here. Yeah. And that is so clear.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've spent years now investing in the spiritual fabric of the city, and you talked about the transient nature, the revolving door. For those like you, Guy, who've been able to be rooted here and stay here, what is it like? How are you able to do that and not burn out or move on like so many do?
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted, Alicia. I think, first of all, a deep sense of calling is really important. And that especially applies to New York City. But I would just say, like, in general, anybody trying to be obedient to the will of God in their lives needs to love where they live and have a deep calling, a sense of conviction that they're living in the right place, not just out of convenience or not even just to be close to family. Those are important things, but genuinely because they believe they're supposed to be where they are. The other thing I remember in the early days, we had some mentors that told us, in order to sustain your love and passion for New York City, you need to rest outside of New York City. Now, I'm an urban person. I love the city. So there are days when I'll prayer walk or just take my day off and walk around the city or just hang out in my local park or whatever. And that's actually very refreshing for me. But the principle of what our mentors were saying at the time really began to ring true, especially with a young family. When we moved here, my wife was pregnant pregnant with our youngest, but we already had a 5-year-old and 2-year-old. And so we created little rhythms where we would just like pop up to the mall in Nyack at the Palisades Parkway and just like play like our suburban life in this giant mall just for a Saturday, just for a few hours. And that gave us a sense of like recovery and rest and kind of recalibrating our rhythms. And I would also add to that the ability to not just rest for a day, but also have like good rhythms of Sabbath and good family rhythms and good like vacation time as well, to the degree that somebody can afford it. So work hard, play hard, rest well, strong conviction. And then I think community is a huge part of it. Like people that are for the city, that are running in the same direction, but maybe in different parts of the sort of the bigger picture, and people that you have full permission to be your full self, but also be able to say like, don't just hold me accountable to the times when I mess up, hold me accountable to the person that I've said I want to become.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we think about accountability in terms of the negative. Oh, I really screwed up, and it's confession. And that's really important. That's part of it too. But what if we had also people in our community that are like, reminding us of who we say we want to be or who God's called us to be, and encouraging us to move forward in that. So genuine community, I think, is also really important.
Well, so that's a great segue into talking about unity within the church, which is something you've really leaned into. Why does that matter so much in a city like New York City?
Well, it matters no matter where we are for a lot of reasons, but in particular, I want to start out by answering that question theologically. We see in the scriptures a very clear example of how a handful of apostles and disciples and Jesus himself inaugurated the local church and then went to different cities and established that church. And what we have in that example, both explicit and implicit, is a city church. Paul writes to the church in Rome. He writes to the church in Ephesus. He doesn't write to First Baptist Church of Macedonia. There's not a specific expression, even though there had to have been multiple house churches across these places, especially as time went on. So there's a real sense of there's a church, there's the big C church in a locality.
Yes.
And then we also double click on what Jesus says in John 17, and we have a very clear understanding way before there was denominations and local churches and the expansive movement of the church across the globe. Jesus says, would you be one? God, he prays, Father, would you make our church, your people one as we are one? And then there's a promise attached to that prayer. And that is that if the church is one, then the world will know that God is love and that God is one. So there's an apologetic to church unity. And then there's the theological construct, which we obviously didn't spend a ton of time on. But the other element is practical. You've got this entire city. There's no way that any one church can accomplish it. So we've got all these different expressions, and yet we're all still part of the same story and the same family of God. And we need help. I just met with a church planter recently, and he was just expressing how sometimes he doesn't know where to go. He doesn't know who to ask. He doesn't know who to turn to. Is this a good idea or a bad idea? Should I try this strategy? Has this worked before? Right? And if we're in community with one another in the church space across the city, then we can actually avoid some of the dumb tacks. We can be more effective, and we can destroy the idol of competition and comparison, and actually collaborate together. So that leads me to the final piece. It's not just theological, it's not just practical, but I think it's more impactful. I think we can do more together. Like, what's that old, I think it's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I wish I could attribute that to the right source at this point. But regardless of who said that, I think that proverb rings true.
Well, so that proverb would be the perfect motto for FOR.NYC,
yeah.
wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about FOR.NYC.
Sure.
For folks who may not be familiar with it, what is it? How did it get started?
Yeah, so those are two different questions. FOR.NYC sits in the space of what's called a city gospel movement, which essentially is an organizing principle and a body of work here in the U.S. that goes about 30, 40 years back. But essentially it argues that somebody needs to wake up in the morning thinking about church unity and leader health in a particular locality. That pastoring is really beautiful. It's an important profession and vocation. But most of the time, pastors are very busy and have a lot of pressure on their plates. And they're very focused on parts of Openness in Ephesians 4, right? Paul says he's given offices. The Lord Jesus Christ has given offices to the local church: apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. In my experience, most pastors are shepherd, teacher, or evangelist. But that leaves out the prophetic and the apostolic elements within the local church community. So in a way, FOR.NYC and all city gospel movements create a platform so that all 5 offices can exist and live, at least within the larger church ecosystem. So FOR.NYC exists specifically to catalyze city gospel movement in New York City by equipping resilient leaders, by uniting the church, Big C church across all 5 boroughs, more specifically in local neighborhoods. That's a strategy piece. And then finally, catalyze city gospel movement by accelerating mission. What we understand is all these resources, human capital as well as financial, are stuck. They're stagnant. They're in ivory towers and they're not accessible. But so how do we find release valves and get those resources out into the larger ecosystem? So that's part of my job. Wake up in the morning, create the architecture or the banks of the river so that these 3 things can happen. So then the mission of God can accelerate. That's the water in the river. That's the mission of FOR.NYC.
And how long ago did FOR.NYC begin?
So officially we started in October of 24. As an idea, it was kind of germinating behind the scenes or underground for about a year before that. But I've been in the citywide movement space since 2012 or so, and then started a network in the East Village where I planted the church in 2010. So network movement on a local level in 2010, some larger citywide stuff 2014 through 2019, and now this official role with FOR.NYC.
You've been building up to this moment for a long time.
The Lord has been preparing me, and I've been lucky enough to have good people and advice and mentors and to say yes along the way. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, so in the last couple of years since FOR.NYC has officially begun, can you share any stories with us that stand out about what happens when you unlock things from ivory towers, when leaders don't operate in silos?
Yeah, I mean, I'm immediately drawn back to the way the Lower East Side Pastors Collaborative started, where a couple of older pastors in the neighborhood with credibility and reputation dared to partner with me, a brand new newcomer, and create what we eventually called the Lower East Side Pastors Collaborative. We met once a month for lunch and prayer and devotional. Nobody was allowed to celebrate anything, promote their own agenda or special programs. But out of relationship, Alicia, over time, what happened is we built trust. And because we had trust, we were able to say, hey, would you want to partner together? And one pastor who maybe had a baptismal would allow another church plant to use their baptistry for special services, or we'd preach for each other and share pulpits, or we would go on mission together in the neighborhood. So this is a really very specific example. Then I think about Hurricane Sandy hitting in 2012. You remember all of Lower Manhattan was without power for 6 straight days.
Oh, I remember.
It was like I Am Legend or something. It was very disorienting. But the local church stood up, rose to the occasion, and met the needs of our neighbors in the Lower East Side. Little did we know, we were running the largest hurricane relief site in all of New York City, from the city to Salvation Army to United Way. No matter who it was, the church in the Lower East Side was running the largest hurricane relief site. We were able to mobilize because of network, because of relationship and church unity.
Wow.
So we ended up serving over 6,000 people a day, hot meals. We had 500 volunteers a day from every church and neighborhood across the city.
Wow.
And we were able to serve and meet the needs of our neighbors that way. So that's some of the stories. More recently, FOR.NYC, we released this data set through Barna called State of the City, and you can find it on our website. But one of the results or outcomes of that, Alicia, of that project was an emphasis on mental health. And what we know from the research and also just our own lives is that a majority of people today struggle with mental health realities, and depression, loneliness, and anxiety among the top 3 from this most recent research. And in particular, 64% of all Gen Z New Yorkers struggle weekly with anxiety, depression, and loneliness. So a church plant in New York heard this data, reorganized their entire semester programming, got their Gen Z congregants involved, created a 6-8 week small group study using therapy and the Bible and their access that they had to professionals, created this 8-week program, advertised it, promoted it, shared it with their friends, and they had the biggest, most successful small group experience that the church had in its young existence, because they got the data. They wanted to meet the needs of their local community. They empowered their own people, and they created a brand new program simply because of this information that FOR.NYC had access to and then gave away.
Wow.
So that's one example. Some other examples are, I get to take pastors and Christian leaders away on retreats every year. And so we take about 40 pastors away, and they get to recover their soul and take a deep breath and be in God's country in Wyoming and have some fun and not have the pressure of the city, and also get kind of recharged and regroup for ministry as well. And those are just a couple of stories that come to mind off the top of my head.
Wow, that's so great. Well, so for pastors and other ministry leaders who aren't involved in FOR.NYC yet and they want to be, how can they take that first step?
The easiest thing to do is just to go to our website, which is exactly our name, FOR.NYC, and subscribe to the email. And this sounds like a commercial, and I hate that it sounds this way, or at least I don't want it to come across this way. But the easiest way to get involved is to sign up for our emails and then to look for or start a network in your neighborhood. It's one thing for me to be able to say from a citywide perspective, like, here's our big initiative and we're going to go after these 6 things and everybody rally around what I say. But the truth of the matter is I'm not on the block in Fordham or Bensonhurst or on the North Shore. Like, if you're a pastor in these communities, you know best and have access to the people that do know best. So my advice to you is figure out what network and unity looks like in your neighborhood. To go on a little adventure to figure out what the biggest needs are in your community, and then begin to address them. And in a way, you're living out the mission of FOR.NYC, whether you feel connected to us or not. Sign up for the email, follow us along, show up to our stuff, but just do the work. Just pick your head up. Maybe just like if every pastor could spend 5% of their work life focused on church unity, I think it would completely change the landscape of New York City.
Guy, something you just said really got me really excited, because I think when people hear about something like FOR.NYC and they don't understand what a city gospel movement is, I think they begin to wonder, is this kind of like a denomination? I'm already part of a denomination.
Right. Got this network thing over here. Yeah.
Is this a collective? Like, I don't know. Like, what am I obligated to bring to the table? But what I heard you very clearly say is, you, pastor, go start something. You go start a network in your neighborhood, and we'll give you tools and resources and a touch point, right, to help you get going. Yeah. And we'll put you in touch with others who are running networks. You'll get a state of the city every year with real data to fuel the work you're doing in your neighborhood.
That's right.
But pastors are builders and they're starters, and I think they want to be empowered to do something like this. Yes. And what I just heard from you is that's exactly what you want them to do.
We were talking about this earlier. There's an assumption that New Yorkers are not just professional, but they don't want to be told what to do. Mm-hmm. And there's probably a New Yorker like that out there, more than one. But in my experience, as pastors, as leaders, we want to know that we're being faithful. We want to know that we're being practical. We want to know that we're being effective. And in the space of ministry and network stuff, one of the things that I've found to be true, and we have some data on this as well, is Christian pastors and leaders want to know that they're being effective. They want to be informed. They want to see the fruit, but they also want to help. They want help. And so we want to create resources that empower the local church as the hero in their communities, not FOR.NYC. Almost think about it like an operating system. You're really grateful to have your Android or iPhone, Apple device, but you're not really thinking often about the software that's running behind the scene to make your apps work or to make it turn on so you can send that text message. But that's kind of what FOR.NYC can be, is this operating system behind the scenes that's coming alongside of both pastors, Christian leaders, and the local church to make it all go better, more effective, further, deeper, with better outcomes.
Yeah, that's so good. So Guy, I think as you talk about unity and doing things with others, something that strikes me is that you're not trying to do this on your own.
No.
Right? Like, you're not trying to do FOR.NYC on your own. You're part of City Leaders Collective,
yes, which
helps to empower city gospel movements all over
the globe, actually.
Yeah. So, well, tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful thing. City Leaders Collective was started by 3 people, one of whom is Eric Swanson, who's been in the game for a really long time. He's in his 70s. He's kind of like the grandfather of this space. And he wouldn't mind me saying that. And if he were sitting here, I'd call him an old man too. But Eric's an amazing man. So Eric and Rod Kelly and Daria have created this platform, and it's an equipping, content-driven strategy and platform, but also it's community. And it is a space where people like me across the country, and in some cases across the globe, can come together, not just for content and best practices, but for actual relationship. And so one of my ways to feel not alone in this work isn't just by being connected to a bunch of amazing pastors in this city, and also like my community I was mentioning before, but also within the larger city movement space. So Eddie Copeland down in South Florida, or my friend Nick Nye in Columbus, or Eric or Rob, like I mentioned, and Daria and others. So one of the really cool things about this work, though, is that as things mature and progress, we also realize there's more opportunity. And as consummate builders and starters, we realize there's an opportunity to create a brand new national platform that City Leaders Collective and the City Gospel Movement folks at the Plow organization in Portland haven't quite been able to meet by themselves. So even on a national level, Alicia, what we're doing is creating a brand new national coalition called the Every City Coalition. And that's essentially a brand new space where we're raising new capital, we're clarifying what we do, we're adding credibility to this work, and we're also doing it together. So we're literally living out the embodiment of collective impact and unity on the national platform now, not just City Leaders Collective and City Gospel Movements over here and all the little different sort of disparate or disconnected platforms, which is really exciting.
Wow. So we have a lot of ministry leaders who are not just in New York City, but they're all over.
Sure.
If they want to get, if they are really excited to hear about the work you're doing here in New York City, they want to do something similar in a different city, they want to be plugged in nationally, how do they get started?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're tracking about 60 to 100 city gospel movements across the country in various forms of sophistication or development. So you're not alone. If somebody's listening to this or stumbles upon this message and conversation is like, I want to be a part of that, there might be one in your city already, or God might be putting it in your heart, in their heart, to steward something like this. So right now, the ECC, Every City Coalition, doesn't have its own permanent website up yet, but be on the lookout for that. I would say track any of the city gospel movements across the country that you're aware of. I mentioned South Florida. Charlotte has one called For Charlotte, Tucson, Orange County, Portland, Oregon, Chicago, Together Chicago, obviously FOR.NYC. Any of our local websites are going to promote that information. And I can tell you the Every City Coalition National Conversation Conference, the very first one, is October 13 through 16. I think that's a Monday through Friday, but we can double check, in Washington, D.C. And that's going to be an in-person experience. And that experience especially is built for donors, practitioners, and anybody who's interested in learning more about City Gospel Movement. It's going to be in that space in DC at the Museum of the Bible. That week of, I think those dates are right, but sometime in that time frame in October. So the internet is a fascinating place. If you Google that, I'm sure at some point in the near future, that information will be available.
The internet is a great place. Thank you, Guy. Really exciting stuff. Let's bring it back to New York City as we close. Yeah. You have a really unique vantage point into what's going on here in New York City. As you look across the landscape, what is giving you the most hope right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, Alicia. I think the fact that the church is still here after all these years is really hopeful. It gives us a ton of hope. We stand on the shoulders of giants, men and women who have gone before us, stewarding the kingdom of God. And our research shows that New York City is obviously not perfect. The Harvard Human Flourishing Project, it's this longitudinal research. And as a result, they came to the conclusion that faith is a critical part of what it means for any human being to fully be alive, to flourish. And then they created a scale across those metrics to be able to measure how healthy is a community, a city, or a person. And based on the research, both that we did with Harvard and with Barna, FOR.NYC can now say the health number for New Yorkers is 68 out of 100. So if this was a collegiate class, we'd be failing, but it's also better than if it were 38. So what that tells me is across the Human Flourishing Project, New York is doing pretty good, but we've got a lot of room for improvement. And by the way, the strongest number out of all the different components that research project measures, faith is the strongest one. So what gives me hope about the church and faith in New York City in the future? So faith is trending up. New York City is predominantly showing as an open to the gospel landscape, which is very unique for this time. And I don't know the last time that's been true of New York. Maybe the Fulton Street revival, maybe. And so there's a tremendous opportunity here and openness. Our research also shows, Alicia, that the average unchurched New Yorker has a positive perspective of the local church. So what that tells me is the church and pastors and anybody of faith can move from a defensive posture to an opening, curious, welcoming posture. So what gives me hope is the landscape is shifting to be more open, but that's an opportunity to any person of faith and any church in the city to go, what are the needs of my community? How can we increase the perception of our local community, especially the unchurched? How can we be curious and invite people in to create a space of belonging, a place of purpose, and a place of engagement? So how is the church also solving the problems of their local community? So that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. We're being invited. It's a new opportunity. Today is a brand new opportunity for the Church of New York to step into that space and to be good news to all people.
Oh, that's so good. Guy, thank you. I'm stirred up. I'm excited. I want to get out there.
Yes.
You know, I will say that, again, being a 20 plus year New Yorker, sometimes you hear data like that and it's just data, right?
Yeah.
But I can say that in my conversations with friends and neighbors, that data, I would agree with that data.
Yeah.
Like
it feels real, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It feels real in just my personal conversations and friendships and relationships. It is a very exciting time to be doing ministry in New York City. Thank you, Guy, for everything that you're doing at FOR.NYC. And I can't wait to see the impact it will continue to have over the years.
Yeah. Thank you, Alicia.